When I was 9 years old, I was terrified of my bedroom. I find it hard to explain because looking back, it was an ordinary, boring room that offered nothing in terms of objects or ambiance that warranted the uneasy feeling I got from it. The walls were blue, the floors were hardwood, and the room was mostly empty save for my bunk bed, a dresser, and a small table that I used as a place to draw pictures and play games. My family had lived in the house for a couple of years up to this point, and while I would soon move out of that room, the months leading up to the move were quite uncomfortable. You see, in my room there was a small cabinet-like opening built into the wall, which opened up to the pipes that connected to the bathtub and sink in the bathroom adjacent to my room. This is normal practice in older houses to allow plumbers access for fixing leaks and whatnot. However, due to the cabinet's proximity to the basement, sometimes bugs, ants, beetles, and spiders would crawl through into my room and scuttle over the lower bunk, my radio, and the windowsill. Many nights I stood afraid in the doorway, wanting to get to my bed but afraid of the bugs between me and my pillow. Most times it would take a few minutes to work up the courage to run to the bed and jump on the second bunk so they couldn't get me, but eventually I would make it there. It was even worse trying to fall asleep. Every so often a feeling would come over me while I sat or played in my room. I never could fully describe what the feeling was or where it came from. It was almost as if something or someone was close to me, but no one was ever there. I never heard voices, just a presence of some sort. One night I was sitting on the top bunk, reading my book with a flashlight. A few chapters in, the yawns were becoming deeper and my eyelids heavier, so I put the book down and turned off the light, then laid my head down on my pillow. I had always slept with the door slightly open to allow some light from the hallway to creep into my room. Normally I'd lay with my back to the door while I waited for sleep to take me, but just as I closed my eyes I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My room was the first door at the top of the stairs, so it wasn't uncommon for me to hear my parents or my sister ascending or descending, depending on the time of day. As this was nighttime, and my sister was already in bed, I assumed it was my mom or dad coming to check on me. Anxious to see them, I rolled over and faced the door, waiting for one of them to push it open and peek their head in. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and made one final tinny wooden thunk as the final step was crested. Then, the sound stopped. Nothing. My heart pounded in my chest as the familiar uneasy feeling washed over me. I waited, quietly begging for my parents to come through the door. Then I heard it. Hello? It was a question, not a greeting, and in a voice I didn't recognize. The voice was female, but it was deep and icy, almost scared. Then the sound of footsteps met my ears once again. My door was about 3 steps from the stairs, so each footfall seemed to boom and echo as anticipation built in the room and in my thoughts. Wild they were, crashing and colliding in a tangled array of chaotic overload. Then, everything went still. Quiet. My door creaked open and I forced myself to open my eyes. A dark figure, tall and lanky, blotted out the hallway light as it stood motionless in the doorway, clearly staring at me. We stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, neither of us moving or speaking. Then, without a sound, the dark figure continued through the doorway and approached my bed. It was then that I found my voice. I screamed, loud and unreserved. I let out every ounce of fear and panic in one thunderous cry. I heard my door slam as my voice subsided, and I crumpled into my pillow, sobbing and shaking. My parents both burst through the door and took long, hurried steps towards the bed, comforting and consoling me. To this day, I've never been sure if it was just a nightmare or if it was real, but I've never been more scared in my life than I was that night. In the winter of 2006, I was a senior in college. At the time, I worked for a professor who had asked me to house and dog sit for him while he was out of town at a championship football game that our school's team was competing in. I was never much of a sports fan, so I agreed, and was excited to spend the weekend in a big house with a cute dog. The house was situated on a large plot of land in the middle of nowhere. It had the towering look of a mid-tier mansion that one might think most professors live in. For a broke college student, it was overwhelmingly huge. The professor was going to be gone for 3 days, and he gave me free rein of the house and the many various toys he owned on the property, including horses, a fishing pond, and some recreational vehicles. I invited my girlfriend to join me, and since she wasn't going to the game, she agreed. The first 2 nights were uneventful. We played games, we watched movies, and even took time to play with the professor's dog, but being a small, older dog, she tired out easily, so the playtime didn't last terribly long. On the third night, the three of us, me, my girlfriend, and the dog, sat in the living room in front of the fireplace, and she and I talked about the challenges of senior year and what we were going to do after we graduated. Suddenly, the dog's head shot up at attention, and a second later she took off at a sprint from the living room and disappeared into the hallway, barking hysterically the entire way. We got up and followed the sound of her frantic barking and found her at the back door, obviously upset at whatever was out there. At first, we shrugged it off. We assumed she sensed a coyote or some other animal out there, and for the sake of keeping her safe, especially with the chance of coyotes, we made the decision to keep her inside. Minutes pass, then a quarter hour, and the dog hasn't stopped barking, despite the two of us sternly insisting that she do so. Soon, I could see my girlfriend was clearly getting more anxious, and I comforted her, telling her it's probably just an animal and that we'll be fine. She's clearly past her breaking point, and says she wants to go outside to investigate just to see what's out there. Despite my reasoning that it's probably not the best idea, she slips on her coat and heads through the front door. I watch her from the porch as she circles around the corner of the left side of the house where the back door sits. A minute or two later, she comes back around to where I'm standing and she says she saw something small and gray, probably a coyote, but it ran off. Just an animal. We were both relieved, but pretty spooked. We headed back inside and locked the door behind us. Still, the dog's barking continued, now more frantic and desperate. We now found her at the window on the other side of the house. We tried to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the more anxious we got. I jokingly suggested that she and I head to bed. Between my stifled laughter and her elbow finding my ribs, I heard it. The faint sound of a young girl singing a soft, eerie lullaby. It cut through the noise of the dog clearly and grew louder with each second, and then stopped abruptly. I stared into a void for a moment, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The dog is silent now. Everything is silent. Then the voice returned, this time closer and louder. It sounded like it was right outside the window next to us. And then again, it stopped. I looked to my girlfriend to see if she had any reaction to offer, hoping she hadn't heard anything and that it was all in my head. When our eyes met, hers were wide with fear. "We need to go, now," she said. "Why?" I asked, hoping we were concerned about two different things. She looked at me, astonished. "You didn't hear that girl singing?" she asked. That realization was all it took. We grabbed the dog, ran to the car, and left. I called a friend who agreed to let us spend the night, and in the morning we went back to clean up the house. There were no signs of there having been a girl or a coyote near the house. I guess we'll never know what was there that night. When I was deployed in Kosovo, my team did a lot of night missions that required us to cover a great deal of ground in a short period of time in order to make our extractions, all of it while remaining undetected by anyone in the areas that we would pass through. During one of our recon missions, we had started by getting dropped off in a remote location to identify whether shipments of mortar rounds and mines were being moved through the area. Our extraction was going to be before daybreak, and we needed to make it just over 17 kilometers before then. The terrain wasn't too overgrown, and we had good intel over the area. The moon was full, naturally, so I knew that unless we encountered someone hostile, it was going to be an easy night. Our team was normally made up of only 4 men, but we had the opportunity to make this a good training run for some of the new guys, so we took on an extra 3. We still wanted to make sure we played it safe though, so I took rear security and Lenny, one of the new guys, took the position right in front of me. Lenny and I worked great together, so we could easily manage covering our team if needed. We moved about 10 clicks through our mission area without finding anything, and we had made good time doing it. At this point, we needed to start heading for our extraction point, which was located over a good-sized hill and then through an area that was near a village, but not so close to the village that we would be detected. We regrouped, did a head count, checked our ammo and supplies, and moved out again. Being rear security meant that I was the last to move. Just as I was about to start moving, I heard a noise in the trees that were maybe 50 meters to the west. It sounded like a faint scratching, followed by a low moan. I turned and saw Lenny looking in the same direction as well, meaning he had heard it too. Since the new guys were in the middle and not used to looking back every 20 meters to spot their security, Lenny and I were getting left behind. Chances were that the noise was nothing more than a deer, but Lenny and I started moving out using a 2-man bounding technique. We kept hearing the noise, so I told Lenny to head for the team and bring them back into position so we could safely check out the area. I remained in place and waited for the green light after Lenny bolted for the team. Again, I heard the noise, this time closer, and seconds later I saw the trees 15 meters in front of me move and rustle. Then everything stopped. 2 minutes went by. I stayed as silent as possible, controlling my breath and watching my front and sides. Lenny and my team were slowly making their way from my right to engage whatever had been following us. They approached and spread, and once the area was surrounded, I signaled to move in, and I approached slowly. The team converged on the spot the noise had come from, and we found nothing. No footprints, no tracks, or any other sign that something or someone had been there. This was my team's cue for giving Lenny and me a hard time for getting left alone and scared. They loved their jokes. We moved out again. I continued as rear security, so again, I was the last to move. Lenny is between me and the next man to the front. This time, no noises as I step away. After about 2 clicks, we came up to an orchard that we needed to move through. The light from the moon was bright, and the trees were spaced, so we did our best to use them for cover as we made our way through the middle of the orchard. Just before I entered the orchard, I heard a noise. The same noise I'd heard before. First scratching, then moaning, but then I heard a little girl giggling. I was sure I'd heard it. It certainly wasn't something my imagination would make up on its own. I'd expected wildlife, if anything, but this was something entirely different. Lenny was now 20 meters ahead of me, and he had turned to wait for me. I moved to my next location, and he moved out again. At the next tree, I remained crouched while I waited for each team member to make their prescribed moves to their next stopping point. Suddenly, I saw movement in the tree I was crouched next to. In the knots of the tree, I could see a face. It swirled and morphed, dark browns and grays mixed together until a young girl's face came clear into focus. She smiled at me, waved, and then giggled. There was something eerie about the giggle, though, like a warning. She then raised a thin arm and pointed towards my team. No, not towards my team, but to a village off in the distance. I could just make out a flickering light and dark smoke that must have been rising from a chimney. I looked back to the girl and she was no longer smiling. She pointed again, angrily, then faded and disappeared into the tree. I was in absolute shock at this point, and there's not a chance in hell that I was going back to my team to report what I had just seen. Instead, I sprinted away from the tree and caught up to Lenny. I kept my mouth shut. Surely I'd simply lost my mind, and I was definitely not going to talk about this with anyone. A few hours later, we hit our extract and left. 2 weeks go by, and I'm told that I'm needed to provide security for a team of combat engineers who are going through an area I am familiar with. In the meantime, my team was going to be going through the area we were in 2 weeks ago, where Lenny and I supposedly got scared. The guys loved to tell the story, and we were always getting ribbed for it. I had yet to say a word to anyone about what I saw. In my mind, I was quite happy about not going back there with my team. I go out with the engineers to help them find a minefield that had been recently laid in an area that kids walked through every day. They took care of informing the village nearby and began blowing the mines in place. Afterwards, I got back and was taken to see my commander and told thanks for the work I'd done. Feeling great, I went back to my barracks and saw that none of the guys in my team had returned yet, so I decided I would kick off my boots and get a few minutes of rest before the chaos of camaraderie returned. I had barely gotten my laces undone when the door burst open and I hear all the guys laughing and joking as they entered. Except Lenny. Lenny wasn't laughing. Instead, he was telling everyone to go screw themselves and was obviously upset. One of the other guys saw me and told me that Lenny had decided he wasn't going on patrol to our favorite spot anymore. It was meant as a joke, but it still stung. I grimaced and waited for stuff to calm down over a few days' time, until one afternoon when Lenny and I were outside babysitting a couple of scouts. Out of nowhere, Lenny asked me what I had seen that night by the tree. He said it like he'd been waiting a lifetime to ask that specific question. I shrugged and said, I don't know. Just my imagination getting the better of me. He then said something that sent chills up my spine. I know you saw her. His face tightened. I saw her too, he said. Tell me I'm not crazy. I felt numb. Words were lost. After a few seconds of processing, I said, You're not crazy. Where did you see her? Lenny looked straight in my eyes. Inside a tree, he said. I had never given any information to Lenny about what I saw, or details that could have caused him to come up with that scenario all on his own. When I saw the girl in the tree, Lenny was 40 meters away from my location and could not have seen me looking at the tree. I have no idea what the girl was pointing at or what she wanted. Was I supposed to go to the village? This still haunts me to this day. This wraps up today's episode of The Dark Omnibus. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support is greatly appreciated. Also, be sure to turn on all notifications so you don't miss any strange and scary stories in the future. If you're in need of more dark tales from the Omnibus, watch this video and hear the true accounts of some of history's most brutal but lesser known serial killers. Until next time, Dark Ones.